Hello guys! E aí galera, beleza? Então, já vamos começar aqui a nossa live internacional com o Dr. Bill Schindler. Já estamos aqui a postos. Essa vai ser uma live histórica. E ele já está aqui com a gente. Hello Dr. Bill, I'll put you here with me.
To see you.
Okay. Hello Doctor!
Hello.
How are you?
Good. I've been waiting for this. I'm so glad we're getting together like this.
This will be a great transmission. You are in Maryland. Are you in Maryland?
Yes,
You're
I'm
in
in Maryland.
Yeah?
Yes. Yep,
How
it's
is
8 o'clock here.
how's everything in COVID and this pandemics?
The numbers are, I live in a rural area, very rural area, and the numbers have been rising here as well a little bit. And we'll see, they just closed the kids' school for the fall. It's going to be completely virtual.
Yeah,
So,
here too.
yeah.
My kids, I have two kids, and they are watching online classes and put the parents a little crazy because
Yeah.
everybody's in home. And
It is interesting to see how hard teachers really do work when they do a good job, right?
yeah. So, doctor, can you tell about a little bit about yourself for the Brazilian public? I think the time you came here to Brazil, I think too little people get to know you, and I think we can make you a little more celebrity here.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to talk with you. Sure. So I think that the best way for me to start is to let everyone know that I'm 47 years old, and throughout almost my entire life, I've had an incredibly unhealthy relationship with food. And really all the work that I'm doing now is the result of this real weird roller coaster of this relationship. And it started, as a kid, I was overweight, pretty significantly overweight, very concerned about body image. Food to me wasn't something that nourished me. I looked at food and I thought it was something that made me ugly or made other kids make fun of me. That was what I thought about food. So when I ate, that was what was going through my mind. And then I actually became an athlete in high school, a very serious athlete, and I wrestled. And I ended up wrestling for a Division I level in college at Ohio State, a very intense program, one of the best programs in the country. And I switched, this one unhealthy relationship with food for a completely different one. I looked in shape, right? I mean, my body, because I was working out so hard, I looked in shape. I never really felt good, but I looked better. And food was still something that didn't nourish me. Food was something that prevented me from making weight, or something I should be scared of for, over a decade of my life.
Okay.
And then when I finished wrestling, and I was no longer a college athlete working out massive amounts of time per day, all the weight came back on, and with it, irritable bowel syndrome and all the other inflammatory diseases and things that come with it. And throughout this entire time, I was always asking myself this question: what should I eat? Because I thought if somebody could tell me that question, or tell me the answer to that question, what I should eat, all of a sudden all my problems would go away. And I searched and searched, and I actually was a nutrition major for some time in college. I hired nutritionists, I hired doctors, I read all the fitness magazines I could, I listened to my coaches, and none of it made sense. And through a roundabout way, I took a really unique approach to trying to answer that question, and became an archaeologist. So I study ancestral, or study the past from millions of years ago to more recent thousands of years. And my focus with the archaeology, I mean, I consider myself a food archaeologist now, but for much of that time, what I focused on with regards to archaeology is the actual technologies themselves. So I became trained in learning how to replicate stone tools, and learn how to replicate ancient forms of fire and ancient pottery and these sorts of things, to better understand the archaeological record. But this entire time, I'm thinking to myself, what's the relationship between food and diet and health and evolution, and how things changed over time? And this was always running in the background. And then one day, about my oldest daughter's 16, so about 16 years ago, you have to remember, to train on some of these technologies, I was spending hours every day, literally banging rocks, right?
Yeah,
hours
yeah.
and hours and hours for years. So I would spend a lot of time in the garage and in the driveway, and I'm banging rocks. And one night, my wife comes out, and she says, "Hey, I need you to come inside." And I said, "Yeah, I'll be in a minute." And she's like, "No, no, 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 no. I need you to, like, bring all this inside, this passion, this energy, all of this. You need to come inside. You have a family now. Can you take all that you're doing and make it," there was just a series of conversations, but can you bring it in and make it relevant to our family?
I got it. I got it.
So I'm sitting there, and she was right. So for weeks, I'm thinking, how does this all relate? Everything I've been, everything I was scared of my entire life, my relationship with food, my relationship with archaeology, and all of this. How does it make sense? And if I can figure this out, I mean, what better purpose to my passion than to feed my own family, my newborn daughter, most nourishing food ever. So what I realized, and it literally was a light bulb moment in the shower one day, I realized that almost every single prehistoric technology that I've been training on for decades has something to do with food. Like literally almost everything ever invented prehistorically has to do with either getting food, processing food, storing food, redistributing food, sharing food.
Yeah.
And if that's true, which I'm convinced it is, then you can't disconnect the role of technology and food processing with the food itself. And then I dove head deep, and I realized that, in a roundabout way, I've been doing all this work, towards this end goal, and I just didn't realize it. So here's the basis for all the work that I'm doing now. What I've realized is that the human body, with incredibly significant nutritional needs, very high nutritional needs to fuel these large bodies, these incredibly large brains.
Yeah.
We require technology to process food. And this light bulb moment was, I realized that my entire life I've been searching to answer the question, what I should be eating. And I realized that it was the wrong question. The question I should be asking and trying to answer is, how should I be eating? The human body is the human digestive. We have one of the least efficient digestive tracts of any animal on the planet, and have these incredibly high nutritional needs. And through time, as our bodies and brains have grown, through evolution, through millions of years, our bodies got bigger, higher nutritional needs. Our brains got bigger, exponentially higher nutritional needs. And at the same time that our guts were getting smaller, our teeth, the one thing we have going for us to process food is that are actually getting smaller as well. So what does this mean? It means that we have figured out ways of taking raw materials that our body has literally no business eating and transforming them into the safest, most nourishing food possible. And that statement right there is the basis for all the work that I'm doing now, the basis for how I approach food, diet, and health for me, all my students, and anybody that I'm working with.
Great. Great. One of the things I thought is most interesting in your work in the Eastern Shore Food Lab is I saw some pictures of a dinner you make for the board, board of the college board, and each course of the dinner was a period in time for nutrition. Sure. I thought that was great. And I really trying to replicate that with a chef here in my city. And we are trying to do something like that. I thought that was great. So how was your relationship with Atala?
Oh, Chef Alex. So I have been a fan of Alex Atala's work for a very long time. I think, his approach to food is amazing, but the work that he does in the Amazon, the way that he approaches people, and it was just, phenomenal. And I was able to make a contact with him through a roundabout way, through people I work with at the Italian Culinary Institute, and then this woman in France. And anyhow, I got in contact with him, and I said, listen, my son was coming to play soccer in Sao Paulo a year and a half ago. And I said, listen, I love the work that you do, and I'd love to share with you some of the work that I do. And, I'm coming down anyhow, any chance we can meet. And he said, absolutely. So I came down, I dropped off my son, and I went to see him. And it was at a time when there was a lot of burning in the Amazon. and he literally had just taken off in a plane to go do some of his amazing humanitarian work. And I got to meet some of the other people in the restaurant, and people that he worked with very closely. It was a great visit, and they treated me amazing. And I said, listen, here's some information about what I'm doing. I think there's a lot of stuff that overlaps with the incredible work that Alex is doing. If there's ever anything we can do together, let me know. And I really thought that would be the end of it. And then that's when they contacted me to come and speak at Fruto this past year, which was wonderful. And one of the cool takeaways with that was, when I spoke, I talked about stone tools and all this history through time. And I was talking to Alex, and I said, listen, the very first intentional food processing by our ancestors, the first time that we were able to overcome these physical limitations and access incredibly nutritious food for the first time ever was when our ancestors literally just busted a rock and, made the first stone tool. And I said, that's the same thing that you and your other chefs are doing in your restaurant. You're transforming raw ingredients into their, incredibly delicious but nourishing forms to your chef's knife. And he said, will you do a stone tool lesson with my chefs? Absolutely. So
Great.
We did it at Dom, and we went in and in the kitchen, in the kitchen in there, we're making stone. All the chefs made a stone tool. It was actually something I'll never forget. It was fantastic.
That'll be great. That's great. That's great. So let's dive in the human food history from herbivore to omnivore. So we were herbivore a long time ago.
Yes. Herbivores and insectivores. We can't disconnect the insects in our diets.
Yeah.
In fact, they were probably by far, I'll back up a little bit, but during the time that we were herbivores, we were also eating insects. And if we weren't eating insects, we would never have been able to accomplish any of the growth that we did at all.
Interesting.
And it especially, and you watch other animals like chimpanzees, during times of increased nutritional need. And for our ancestors, and even for us, for a female, that's when she's pregnant or lactating, especially when she's lactating. And if you look at other primates like chimpanzees, for example, their insect consumption skyrockets during those times.
Interesting.
Very, very.
So insects were a very important part of our diet.
Very
important. Yeah. Okay.
And still are, obviously, in certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
So imagine this, and I like to say this at the beginning of most conversations that I have with this topic. Imagine if I took you or anybody listening, stripped you down naked, and threw you in the middle of the woods and said, live. Right? So the first thing you'd realize is that most of us are living in a part of the world that we're not designed to live in, right? Other than around, well, you live in a little bit less hostile than I do temperature-wise, but there's a good part of the year for a lot of different latitudes that without some technology, clothing, fire, heat, shelter, we would die. Yeah. But the other thing we would realize quickly is that even though we're very good at going to a restaurant or a grocery store and paying for food, we have an incredibly difficult time accessing it directly from nature without the help of any technologies whatsoever. So when you're in the woods naked, really, really hungry, this is exactly what you should picture for our ancestors just prior to 3.5 million years ago. Every bit of food. So they were just like us, but smaller. So, a 3.5 foot tall, full grown adult, brains about the size of my fist. And every bit of food they put into their mouth, they collected with their fingers, not very strong bodies, whatever they could see, whatever they could chase down. We're not talking about very much. So that means it's collective foraging. So leaves when they're ready, fruits when they're ready, insects when you can access them. One of the problems, as we know, with plants, especially even more so with wild plants, but all plants contain toxins. All of them.
Yeah.
And there are animals that are set up to do different things biologically with different plants to help detoxify them. We don't have most of that apparatus in our body. So not only are we foraging for different plants, we're foraging for only select plants that are at a very low level of a spectrum of toxicity, but also they're ripe or ready to go. So very limited diet, not much is happening for us. The insects are the best part of it. And then all of a sudden, and this is the way I like to tell the story, it's one point, and it happened in northern Kenya, just west of Lake Turkana, an Australopithecine ancestor, one of these ancestors I'm talking about, was watching something they've seen numerous times on the savannah. They saw a big predator take down another animal, rip it apart, and they're designed to do this. They're fast, they have claws, they have canines, they rip this thing apart, they dive into the inside, they eat all the organs, they eat the blood, they eat the fat, and then they do what the predators often do. It went off and slept off its big meal and digested it. And we see this happen now on the savannah as well. And as soon as that animal, left that carcass full of flesh, full of meat, and went to sleep, all the other scavengers came in. Things that are ancestors to hyenas or buzzards or things came in and were eating the flesh. And here's this, Australopithecine, our great-great-grandfather, grandmother, watching this, salivating, and can't do anything about it. Because, even if you have a huge carcass in front of you running in, we're not designed to take any of that off. But this one super smart ancestor picked up 2 rocks, knocked them together, and struck off a razor sharp flake, and in less than a second, changed the game forever for us. Now we didn't need, sharp nails or incredibly big canines. We had a razor sharp, durable edge, and could run in there and hack off large pieces of meat and bring it back. And that tool is called the Lemekwe tool. We actually have it. It's in the museum in Kenya. I got to hold it. It's an amazing tool. And from that moment forward, we started consuming meat. What's crazy is most people would hear a story like that and say, okay, game's over. We're eating meat. We become human. And it's not. And this is an important part of the story. 3.5 million years ago, we start consuming meat. We found not only the tools, but also the butchered bones of animals that have been butchered, the stone marks in the bones. But we don't see a huge change in the bodies over the next, really, 1.5 million years. There's some changes. There's a little bit of growth, a little bit of brain growth, a little bit of body growth. We, for the first time, start to see our ancestors, Homo habilis, which is the first member of our genus Homo, still fairly small. And, if you listen to most of the people that are talking about the role of just meat eating in our diets today, the carnivore-based people, one thing that I think is lost in that conversation, although I am an avid meat eater and I think it should be an incredible part of our diet, for that 1.5 million years, introducing meat into our diet didn't change us to what we are today. The biggest transformation happens 1.5 million years later at 2 million years ago. And we developed 2 technologies then that changed the game and produced an ancestor that's almost as big as we are, Homo erectus. One is we create fire, right? And we have the ability to control fire. And that changes the microclimate. We can move into different latitudes. We can cook things, which is great. Yeah. But the big change, in my mind, the biggest dietary change is that we start to hunt. And for most people, it's, hey, what's the difference? You're eating meat 3.5 million years ago, well, you're hunting, so who cares? Well, that's our modern perception of how we consume animals today. The difference is when we're hunting 2 million years ago, we become that predator that their ancestors were watching for 1.5 million years.
We get access to the most nutritious part of the animal.
Yes. We have what they call it first access. We have first access to the organs and the blood and the fat, the most nutritious part, which is the part that's always taken by the predators. We're now the apex predator. Yeah. And the combination of hunting and fire produce Homo erectus, which again is a huge jump in body and brain size, not modern proportions, but very, very, as close as it's ever been. And then we just continue to do the things that we're doing really, really well for the next almost 2 million years. In fact, Homo erectus is the most successful of our species. And they're the first to leave Africa. They're the first to populate Asia and parts of Europe. They go into all different latitudes. They actually are moving north. They're moving into northern latitudes at the beginning of the last ice age. I mean, they were incredibly good at what they did. So the changes we've talked about so far is we've gone from herbivore and insectivore millions and millions of years ago to herbivore, insectivore, and scavenger, right? We're introducing scavenged meat into our diets. And that persists until about 2 million years ago, where we introduce hunting and the control of fire. So we're cooking our food, and we're also have first access to the organ meats, the blood, the fat, all of that. And then over time, we continue to just learn how to do several things. What we learn how to do really is create technologies to make our food as safe and nourishing as possible.
Yeah.
And what that means is we're learning how to detoxify other plants, and we're introducing more plants into our diets that we never had access to before because of that. We're learning how to take those plants, which, they have two things that are going against them, plants do. One is that they all have some level of toxin in them. And number two, they don't give up their nutrition very easily. So we develop technologies such as fermentation and nixtamalization and other things to break those, pre-digest that food to get it into our bodies. We learn how to hunt, and then we get better at hunting and trapping and fishing and crabbing and clamming and all those things that we do to access animal foods. And we're doing it, we started one end and we eat all the way through to the other end. And this persists. We see this increase in safety and nutrient density in our diets all the way up to the agricultural revolution, which changes it all on its head at that point.
Yeah, yeah, and I thought this was very interesting. This history, this linear history. But at the point we got in the agricultural revolution, we got some things went very good, some things went very wrong. What we see a shortening of the skeleton of the skull, and we got this in the agricultural revolution. So what is the benefits, the positive points, the pros about the agricultural revolution? What's the cons?
It's so subjective. It's a great question. It's a very subjective question. So the pros of the agricultural revolution, and there's not many, are that, and some people would even argue that these aren't positive things. But let me back up. Let me do it this way. Maybe this is easier. So I ask the same question at the beginning of every semester in one of my classes. And I say, okay, tell me all the good things and the bad things about the agricultural revolution. And I let the students go. And from their modern perspective, things that they put on the pro side are things like, health, it happened ever since, not necessarily due to the agricultural revolution, but things we have now that we didn't have during the Stone Age. Yeah. They said, healthcare and armies and presidents and all these sorts of things. And even one time, I even had a student say a toilet. Which becomes very funny in a minute. So I said, okay, great. And then we spend the second half of the class realizing that most of the things that they listed as positives were only positives because we created a situation because of the agricultural revolution that we needed them, that those things we didn't need earlier. So we didn't need the same kind of health care prior to that because we didn't have the same kind of problems. We didn't need we never had organized warfare. There's no archaeological evidence of organized warfare prior to agriculture.
Interesting.
And so, this idea that we need protection and armies and all this, and it's, being able to defend ourselves. Well, we created a situation directly because of agriculture that we actually needed to produce police and armies and all these sorts of things. And in fact, it's very funny because there was the one student that talked about the toilet. A buddy of mine had just come back from a primitive experience. He was in the wild for like 4 months surviving, and he came back, and I said, what's the weirdest change coming back into civilization from your experience? And he said, the toilet. And I said, what do you mean? He said, no. He said, you don't understand. Eating the diet we're supposed to have, and I know, just bear with me for a minute. I'm sorry this goes here, but and actually squatting, actually properly squatting the way we're designed to, with, he said, full evacuation. He had so much problem getting onto a toilet and feeling good with our modern diet. It was actually very, very interesting. But so there's a lot of stuff that we consider positive that has happened since the agricultural revolution that really needs to be taken in context, because prior to the agricultural revolution, many of these things we didn't need.
Okay.
So that's why I say it's subjective. We were able to feed, more people.
Okay.
But that is just in the form of calories. Like, we're able to give more people calories, but so there was a larger population of sick people is really what it was. And when we started this experiment of agriculture, which in my mind is still an ongoing experiment, the very beginning of it gave us our most fragile resource base we've ever known. And one of my first graduate school class on human osteology, the human skeleton, the very first class I walked in, and the professor had 2 skeletons laid out on the table. They were both from the same place in Pennsylvania, the same site, archaeological site, and they were separated by a couple thousand years in age. And one was a hunter-gatherer, and one was right after they adopted agriculture there. And he said, and everybody in the class was a first-year graduate student. None of us had really done much with bones before. We had no background. And he said, figure out which one is which. And there's nobody in the class that got it wrong. I mean, it was so obvious. One skeleton, the bones were riddled with disease, teeth falling out of their heads, ground down, completely different. Again, same exact place in Pennsylvania with this. So that experiment that we engaged in, beginning in different parts of the world around 15,000 years ago, created a really fragile resource base with not only was there quite often famine. This is another way I like to explain it. I imagine as a hunter-gatherer, you need, and this is dependent on where you live, so I'm just going to throw out made-up numbers, but imagine as an individual hunter-gatherer in a given environment, you need access to 1 square mile for the year to get all the food you need for you.
Okay.
And then this is a very quick calculation. So then, you have your family of 4. So 4 people would need 4 square miles, and a clan of like 30 or 40 people would need whatever. Then when we start agriculture, and your diet is incredibly varied, right? So you have probably hundreds of different plants, dozens of different animals in a given year that you consume. And you get, because of this, not only do you get a real variety of different nutrients, but there's a safety net. If something happened, there was a drought or an insects came in or something happened to one of your supplies of food, one of your lines of supply, you're not going to starve, right? I mean, you have all this other stuff happening. Yeah. But then we go from that, and everywhere that we see a focus on agriculture at the beginning of the agricultural revolution, it's almost always on annual grasses. So it's rice or barley or wheat or maize or whatever. There's some roots thrown in there like manioc, but for the most part, it's very carbohydrate-rich foods. That require a ton of work to prepare the ground, a ton of work to plant the seeds, to take care of the seeds, to harvest them, to dry them, to process them. So we go from very mobile hunter-gatherers with an incredibly varied diet to working harder than ever on 1 or 2 crops that are not, we've bred them to the point that they're not designed to live naturally. So we have to take care of them. And if something goes wrong, we have a big issue because, we're not talking about 40 people and 40 square miles that we deal with in a given year to get resources. And if something happens, we go over to here. We're talking about hundreds or thousands of people that are subsisting on just a few square miles.
Yeah.
Right. We forget how to hunt properly. We forget how to forage, all the things we did before. We're no longer tending the wilderness around us to make sure that the food that's coming is coming in a certain way. We're focusing all our energies on a plot of land. And if it's a flood or a drought or an insect infestation on this 1 or 2 crop that now thousands of people are depending on, what do you do? Right? And this is where the famines come in, and this is where the armies become very important.
Yeah.
So we've drastically reduced the variability in our diet, made a resource base that's incredibly fragile. And, we learn how to do it, right? We learn how to plant more and more and to breed things to be bigger, to do this. But that nutrient density continues to plummet as time goes on. We rarely ever see people selecting for an increased nutrient in a crop. they're selecting for bigger seeds,
Bigger,
or sweeter, or something that's easier to harvest, right?
Yeah.
Those are the things we select for. And,
Yeah.
and most of the time it's at the expense of the nutrients and at the expense of the safety, right? And this continues up until the Industrial Revolution, which in my mind is the worst part of this, because, you know, at every stage, starting with the Agricultural Revolution, we start separating at least some members of our community directly from their food, right? When everybody's in a hunter-gatherer community, certainly people have different jobs.
Of course.
Typically, women are gathering and men are hunting. It's not always the case, but there's typically that sort of separation by maybe age or sex. But when we get to the Agricultural Revolution, we start specializing, and there's just a few incredibly hardworking farmers, other people doing different things. So we start separating people from where their food is coming from. And then at the Industrial Revolution, we go from early on foragers, right? And foragers, and then we turn into forager scavengers. Then we turn into hunter gatherers, and then we turn into food producers when we're farming. And then at the Industrial Revolution, we become food consumers. And most of us, you know, there's hardly anybody in our groups that are producing food. We're all just taking from somebody else, buying from somebody else. And this continues to be worse and worse. So our diets are going down, our safety and nutrients are going down, and our distancing from our food is increasing to the state we have today.
Yeah, there is this thing you talk about, the distancing of the people from the food producer. It's very very hard today. There's a movie, a documentary. I don't know if you saw it. It's a Brazilian documentary. Is in English will be Beyond the Weight. Muito além do peso. There's a documentary about child obesity, and there is sometimes in the documentary the presenter shows some fruit to children, and the children mistake an apple for an orange, something like that. And here in Brazil, we got some children that doesn't know where the eggs come from.
We have the same problem here.
Yeah. So we got so disconnected with the nature, with the animals, that we have the disconnection. The apex, the summit of the disconnection is veganism, on my view, because we treat animals with respect, and we ate all the animal from nose to tail. That's the supreme form of respect.
100%. 100%. It's perfectly said.
Yeah. And if you see the Indians there in America and here too, they do this. They did this, and now we just want the T-bone and just want the filet mignon, and we don't eat the whole animal. That's here we have some difficulties to eat the brains. Yeah, we have to talk to the guy who sell, so he can talk to the guy who produce, so he can keep the brain, so he can buy it. We don't have that's really a problem. Huh?
Absolutely, it sure is, and I 100% agree. And that's one of the sort of campaigns that I've been on with animals. I call it putting a face back on the plate. You know, it's so here, and I'm sure it's the same with you now. People people that are meat eaters celebrate eating meat, like the fact that they can get the big T-bone or the ribeye on the plate. This is great. Yeah. And they'll talk about how it was on the grill, or all this, but God forbid somebody brings up the animal. Like, it's a taboo topic to talk about the animal. And I come from a family, we hunt all the time. In fact, I can see where we hunt deer from the window right now. My son and I, and when we come in, and I can imagine this is what it was like for our ancestors, as they're sitting around a fire after a hunt, and why they're painting pictures on the caves. These conversations about, we'll sit there, remember, we're eating the deer, we're eating the venison, and was my son Billy, he's 14. He's, remember, you know, that deer? Remember when it was running across the field and it did this and we did this and then we tracked it and we did this? I mean, most people would consider that some sort of disgusting conversation, but again, to me, it's beautiful. I have never derived pleasure in. I've been hunting my entire life. I have never derived pleasure in killing anything, and most of the meat that we eat in this house, my son or I hunt, and if we don't, we butcher at least on everything that comes in. And I've never derived pleasure in the killing of the animal, but I derive incredible pleasure in all of the preparation for the hunt. You know, the time with my son and going into the field and making the bows, and as soon as that animal is killed, I feel a huge sense of fulfillment and responsibility to ensure that we use every bit of that animal to nourish my family.
Yeah.
And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. It really is.
I think too. The things that we can do with all the animal, shows the respect we have for that being that gave her its life for us to be alive.
Sure.
That's a great thing. So, Bill, let's shift gears a little. Are we supposed to eat grains, beans, dairy? I think there's a movement today, the carnivore movement, the vegan movement, and and Brian Sanders, the Sapiens diets, and what do we are ready to eat? What can we eat?
You asked it perfect. That was a perfect question, and it's phrased perfectly. We're not designed to eat almost everything. I mean, that's the point, right? So our bodies are literally designed. Our digestive tract is designed to eat the foods that we were eating 3.5 million years ago. Now, this is, and I know I see some things happening. I think I'm talking way too quickly, and I'm sorry. So let me slow it down a little bit because this is so incredibly important. Because this is getting translated at some level, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be.
They're trying. They're trying.
I'm sorry. I get so excited. So this is the hard part to iterate. We are not designed to eat almost every food that we consume. However, our bodies require nutrition from those foods that we're not designed to eat, because we have figured out ways to take those foods and make them as safe and nutritious as possible before it goes into our mouths. And this is a very important point. And we've literally built these bodies and these brains on these changing diets over millions of years to start to bring all sorts of new foods, introduce new foods into our diets. So if we look at our digestive tract and our teeth, and we're designed to eat limited amounts of fruits that digest with no extra help, limited amounts of fruits and vegetables and insects. That's it. But when you start, one of the vegan stances is that, hey, we don't have teeth designed to eat meat. And I say, my response is, well, we don't have guts designed to eat grains. Like there's nothing. Oh, I'm sorry. The only other thing that we're designed to consume, this is an important part of that conversation, is as infants, we're designed to drink raw milk from our mothers.
Raw milk. Okay.
So those are the only foods that we're designed to eat. However, if I tried to feed anybody on the planet a diet based on only the foods that our digestive tract is designed to handle, we would be malnourished and possibly die of starvation.
Yeah.
So then the question is, and this is where how we started this interview with I was always asking what we should eat, and the real question is, how should we eat? How? Because the power lies in what we do to the raw materials to get it ready for our bodies. Because that's one of the things that humans do differently than almost every animal on the planet. We process our food before it goes into our mouths. Now, ancient processing was to increase safety and nutrient density. Modern processing is for other reasons at the expense of safety and nutrient density. But so should we eat grains? Well, no, unless we process them the right way. And this is where one of the issues that I have, there's so many amazing things with the paleo diet approach. There's so many amazing things with carnivore and keto. I mean, there's amazing things being done there.
Yeah.
But I do feel that in all of those cases, there's another step that we could take. So, for example, cutting off, making this arbitrary line at the agricultural revolution and saying everything before it is bad and everything before it is good and everything, since then is bad is sort of silly. The amazing things before it, but there's no way that over 3.5 million years of time, all the decisions that we made about food and diet and health were correct.
Of course.
The ones that worked, right, became traditions and produced populations of people that had babies successfully, and so they persisted longer. But the things in the past generally, sure, were fantastic. But what I want to, I think, sort of get across to your audience is just because the agricultural revolution introduced massive amounts of grains into our diet, massive amounts of carbohydrates at the expense of a diversity of other things, it doesn't mean everything that happened from that point forward is bad. We can still take incredibly important lessons over the past 15,000 years and apply them into our modern diets. In fact, I think we have to, because it's those foods that have been produced over the past 15,000 years that dominate our restaurants and our grocery store shelves today. And if we don't learn to deal with them the right way, we're at a big disadvantage. So as far as grains are concerned, grains are incredibly toxic. Grains are incredibly difficult for our bodies to digest. Mm-hmm. And if you look at modern bread at the grocery store, modern cakes, modern cookies, that's across the board. But the question I would ask of any food is not what I should eat, but how I should eat it. How can I take advantage of ancestral processing techniques to transform these grains into their safest, most nourishing form? And the answer for things like wheat and barley and the other is sourdough. I mean, there's no doubt.
Sourdough, yeah.
Sourdough bread, and real sourdough bread that uses a combination of yeast and bacteria fermentations detoxifies the grains, pre-digest the grains, allow our body to safely access the nutrients in those grains. So, is there an argument that especially adults don't need bread in their diets? Probably. Is there an argument? But I also say there is an argument to be made, and I would make this argument, that if you approach the grains and process them in the proper way, real traditional long fermented sourdough bread can absolutely be a part of a healthy human diet today. Not, you don't want it at every meal, but can it be?
Of course.
So, and this is where I have this big problem. I love the way you ask the question, because most of the time when people ask that question, they say, should humans eat bread? And well, that's a ridiculous question, because if you're talking about, Wonder Bread at the store or sourdough bread, they're different foods.
Completely different.
100% differently. And I wish, I love the movement now. So many people are really not counting calories anymore. Like calorie counting has been a big thing for decades. But now it's like, we maybe don't have to count calories. I wish people would stop or at least suppress some of the discussion, should I eat this? Should I eat this? Should I eat this? Should I eat this? It's not that. It's when I walk into a room and there's food in front of me. It could be in my refrigerator, in my pantry. It could be at a restaurant, or it could be at work and it's food sitting on the table for a party, whatever. No matter what situation I go into, I sort of think of myself as a modern day hunter-gatherer. And I say, okay, here's my foodscape at the moment. I really can't escape it. It's like a hunter-gatherer stuck on top of a mountain 30,000 years ago. This is what I have to choose from. I know how food is made. What of these things have been processed in a way to make them as safe and nutritious as possible? Where can I get the most amount of nutrition with the least amount of work? And that's, where I go to. And so for bread, I will not eat bread unless it's gone through a fermentation process that includes bacteria, a lactic fermentation process.
Yeah, and you produce your own bread.
Absolutely, and I'm so proud. My 16-year-old daughter, at the beginning of COVID, she was volunteering making bread with me for families in need in the community were making sourdough bread, and we made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of loaves.
Great.
And she took to it, loved it, and she started her own business called Rise by Brianna, and she's producing a whole bunch of everything is made using a sourdough process, and it's bread and focaccia and crackers, and it's all made through a long, slow, wild fermentation process. So it's taken off. It's
that's very, very interesting. You are very proud of her, no?
Absolutely. And you know what? Not only is she doing the baking and all that, but she's got a website up. She's got the PayPal thing, all their stuff. She's got it all set up. So proud. So proud. And
Great.
She's nourishing people. And this is the other thing. And I hope this isn't off track, but it's for a while when I really started to get what I believe is a good handle on our ancestral diets and the diets that built us as humans. I started to go down this rabbit hole and suggest, not only in my own home, but for anybody that was listening to me or I was working with, okay, you should only eat these foods that were designed, not that we're designed to eat, but only eat the foods that we're eating ancestrally and take all this out of your diet. And it wasn't working. Like, it was working for me because I was bullheaded about it. But a family with growing children and all the other social pressures, it was very difficult to stay that hardcore. So what I've realized now, and the work that I'm doing now, has been focused on, sure, I do believe that biologically we can determine a diet that is ideal for our species. I mean, there's no doubt. We have a good idea about what our diets have been through time, the diets that built us as humans. We know how our bodies respond to things. Biologically, I think we have a fairly good idea what that is, right? However, for humans, eating is an incredibly intense experience that isn't just biological. It's emotional, it's cultural, it's embedded with all sorts of things. Yeah. So we can't separate that out. And to create the diet that is a long-lasting diet that it nourishes people, nourishes the planet, treats animals the right way, allows us to interact with neighborhoods and people and communities around us. It's a diet where, in my mind, we're taking all the different resources we have access to and using the approaches to transform them into our safe and most nourishing form. It doesn't mean never eating bread again. It means if you're going to eat bread, it needs to be balanced.
Yeah, right? Do it to your own. Huh?
Yeah, and if you're going to consume dairy, it should be high quality raw fermented dairy, which is a completely different food than ultra pasteurized skim milk with chocolate sauce put into it, right? Yeah. So it doesn't. And the other thing that I've realized is, I came, growing up with this unhealthy relationship with food. I was repeatedly going on diets all the time, and the diets were, whether it be Weight Watchers or this or that, the diets always. You felt like you were accomplishing something if you were experiencing some kind of loss or pain, right? It's okay. I feel hungry, so the diet's working.
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable. The diet's working, and that's the most ridiculous thing ever. And I was saying it the other night, and I hope that this doesn't but I think we should think about eating. Bear with me for a minute. We should think about eating, the experience of eating, like we think about sex, right? Both of those, if we think. For health and evolution and just creation of the maintenance of the species, they both perform a very important function. In fact, probably the two most important functions. One is successful reproduction, and one is keeping somebody healthy. Yeah. And with that, sex is wrapped up in all sorts of physical and cultural and just emotions and feelings, and our body responds. Our entire body responds when we do it right in a lot of different ways, right? Yeah. And that's an evolutionary response, right, to making sure that it's done right. And our entire body knows it because we've done it right. Now, what world does it make sense that the most nourishing diet possible should make us feel hungry or make us feel uncomfortable? Or make us feel sick? None. No, nonsense. Nobody needs to go out and listen, in my mind. If you're in tune with your body and you're faced with real food, processed properly, you have all the tools in your body. They're evolutionarily hardwired into your body to make the right choices on how to feed yourself the most nourishing diet possible. You should get up after every single meal and feel better than when you sat down to eat.
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
And that happens when you have real food processed or cooked or prepared properly in front of you, and you're in tune with how your body feels and reacts to it.
Yeah. Let's wrap up here because it's going to be over an hour already. 50 minutes. But I like you. One of the things I like most about your job, your family, you get all of them together. You travel with them. That's absolutely amazing. You got 3 kids, all right? That's it?
3 kids, 15, 14, and 12, yes.
And all of them go with your adventures and with the Maasai, with the canyons. I think this is amazing. You got a great family.
So I'm so proud of all of them. And you know what's great? It's as a father, I just love have the whole family together anyhow. And I really love that they're experiencing the same things that I'm experiencing as well. That's been unbelievable. As a researcher, right, as an anthropologist, what I also love is, what we're doing is we're traveling, working with indigenous and traditional, living and working with indigenous and traditional communities to try to document some of the ancestral approaches to food that are still, they're still hanging on to, and with the purpose of coming back and not only being able to tell their story, but also to try to translate what they're doing in their traditional food processing to modern approaches to food to make the typical everyday things that we eat more nutrient dense, more nutrient bioavailable, and more safe. But an added bonus, which I didn't realize at the beginning of this, is when I'm in a situation living with a group and I see something and interpret it through my experiences and through my eyes, it is so incredibly valuable to also see how my wife and how my 2 daughters and how my son are taking this in and processing it and retelling the story. It's fantastic. I mean, it's like a whole nother education on top of it.
Yeah. And you're talking about when you're talking in the direct on Instagram, you're talking about the modern age family project. What is that?
So my family's mission, it's 3 simple things, right? It's to inspire, to empower, and to nourish. So the inspiration we're trying to get across by allowing people to realize that there's a major problem in the modern food system, to help them understand that this isn't the way we've always eaten, and that there's something you can do about it. The empower part is to try to, and we're working very hard on this. I'm working with one of the directors from the National Geographic project, The Great Human Race. He and I are working on a whole series of videos, cooking videos, but using ancestral approaches to food to transform things in your home kitchen, right, with the tools that you already have.
That's
it'll
fantastic.
So this is the empower part. So the giving people the tools to do this for themselves in their own kitchens, themselves and their families.
Yeah.
And then we've been working on this project for a while, and we're hopefully going to have it begin to launch in September. And then the final piece, which it's my daughter, my 16-year-old daughter that started the bread company, allowed us to realize, is that the inspiration and empowerment is so incredibly important. But there are so many barriers to people. I would love everybody cook every meal for themselves and their families from scratch completely and forage and hunt and do all those things. Amazing. It's not realistic.
Yeah.
But if we can get people to realize that there's an importance to it and even get them to do it some, fantastic. But then we wanted to be able to provide the, whenever possible, the actual food itself to these families that have been processed, sourced properly and processed the right way. So the modern Stone Age kitchen, which is what we've called it, is both the inspirational and empowerment part, but it's also a line of food that has been done, prepared the way that I mentioned. And here's the really cool thing. It's not just weird stuff that, a 40-year-old person that's dead set on eating a certain way is going to eat. Again, and I mentioned this earlier, what we found is that if we can take the everyday foods that we eat, right, as modern, North and South Americans, right, the typical foods that we eat, and if we simply replace them with their safest, most nourishing forms, then we've taken an incredibly large step. And if we can do that and do a little bit of education and empowerment at the same time, then we've taken an incredible step towards real change. So I'm talking about foods like sourdough breads, and this is all based on the research we've done around the world. The healthiest potato chip fried in animal fat you've ever heard of. Nixtamalized maize tortillas fried. These are the kind of things we're talking about, where if we can get the vegetable oils out of the kids, out of the kids' pantries, get them eating real foods again, amazing change. So we have a several-year plan, but we're hoping to be able to start shipping these foods and making them available sometime this fall.
Great. That would be amazing. Man, I just want to thank you so much for your time. It was really great. You're a fantastic guy. I follow your work, and as soon as you come back to Brazil, please, you gotta be here in Northeast. You're gonna love the food here. We got we got very traditional foods here.
Well, listen, two things very quickly, and everybody that's been on, thank you for being on, and thank you for your patience. I know this. I'm thrilled to be able to speak to all of you. I follow the work that you're doing, and likewise, it's an honor to be here and speak to you.
Thank you.
I hope, and anytime you ever want me to come back, let me know. I will. The plan is right now, depending on COVID, but if everything's clear, the family and I are hoping to be back in Brazil in February.
Great.
So we'll figure that out.
We're gonna meet in person in February.
Perfect. Sounds fantastic.
Fantastic. The Cecilia and Camille thank you for your patience. They were the two translators that were helping us in the comments.
Thank you so much. I know I talk super fast, so thank you. Thank you for your help.
Thank you so much. See you.
Bye bye. See you soon. Bye bye.